Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to encourage punctuality, so we'll start right away. Okay, this is the fourth lecture that we do on this theme of the portrait. I decided to come in with shirt because, after all, we didn't have much summer up to now. We'll take advantage of it. Anyway, we have seen that the two themes of the two last lectures that trying to characterize the model by his ethnic character, I would say, on one hand, or by his physiognomy, was treacherous in the sense that you could easily sacrifice the individual to a type, to a general type. And you notice when we showed these portraits of black people that there was no name given to them. It was a black, dark woman or something like that, or a slave, and there's no, and the fact that there's, on the part of the painters, no needs to identify really his model by a proper name or by a first name is symptomatic of that. He is more interested in the type than in the individual, and this kind create an unbalance in the aim and the very intention of what as a portrait should be. So you will see now that instead of trying to find, let's say, the essence or the soul of their model in their bones, you will see that we went to a more humble type of approach, in which maybe the occupation of the personage, of what he's doing, will be one of the key possible to get this balance between some permanent character. After all, it is relationship to work, and for most of us, it's a very big involvement, let's say, for almost all our life. And or also, another approach will be, for instance, a situation as a class, in a social class, let's say. Is he a poor man? Is he a rich man? And how he's situated in the society. This, again, seems to be very exterior, in a way, to the personage, less intimate than bones and shape of skull. But on the other hand, there is a better way to balance between the representation of an individual and to suggest something more permanent. As I told you, I think this is really the aim of a portrait, of artistic portrait. If you are looking just for the individual as such and forget about this permanent aspect, you risk to be very boring. This is the level of a snapshot, let's say, of your family or friends, and in which the only thing that counts is it look like him or not? Was he yawning when I took my photo or something like that? And then it is not, let's say, what great artists try to do. They try to do more than that. They make some resemblance with the individual, but they try to find some more permanent character. So today we will deal with this relationship with occupation. And when you think of the very beginning of the genre, let's say, especially in the Low Countries during the so-called Renaissance of the North, this idea of representing an individual associated with his occupation is very clear. For instance, the one on the left, we don't know exactly his name. It's a portrait of a merchant, but he's really typified, let's say, like one individual that you cannot mix with another one. But on the other hand, to know what he's doing, you just look at all the trimmings, I would say, which is around him. For instance, behind him, these two piles of old papers you have a little note on each one. And on one side, it says missiven, meaning letters that copy of letters I've already sent. And on the other one, it's called draft. And this is something that I just put some ideas, and I will have to send it later. And in front of him, you have, of course, a book in which he put all his account, and even a little balance, a little scale here, but it's not, he doesn't hold it, that was used, of course, to weight money or gold or whatever he needed to exchange. So in this portrait, you have this nice balance between the two aspects. You have his occupation, who is signified by little object around him, and also a strongly affirmed individual. And then you see the other one with this portrait of an astronomer which in this case we know his name. He's called Nicholas Kratzer, and he was active in London, a friend of Thomas More, and about that period. And he's an astronomer, meaning he's circled here by many kinds of, I would say, measuring instrument, like on the wall behind him, and even this little funny cube that he holds that you remind maybe the famous engraving of Dürer representing Melancholia, in which you have also this type of volume. And this was used to measure things, and he was also dealing with these things. He was going from one capital in Europe to the other to sell these devices. And so he's represented as an astronomer because of the object around him. And I would say that the model of this type of presentation was already well established by religious painting, in which you could identify the saints represented by the attribute that were associated with them. For instance, in the representation on the left, you have an evangelist who is represented with a big book. Because he's a writer, so he should be identified with a book. But St. Paul, who is behind him, I made a detail to attract the attention on two things. He has a little roll of paper in his hand. This means the epistle of St. Paul. He was writing letters, so this is the way they were showing letters. And he was also killed as a martyr by a sword. Apparently, his neck was cut. Not only Monsieur Harper have been threatened for that, but in the case of St. Paul, it happens to him. And so these two details were enough for an onlooker of the time to say, oh, this must be St. Paul. This is what we call an attribute of the difference here, of course, there's a tradition behind that. It was known for many, many years. When you represent St. Peter, on the other hand, you must put him in a key in his hand. Why? Because Jesus tell him, here is the key of my kingdom and all that. So he's always represented with a key, with a pair of keys. And you see it here. And St. John, as a young man, and with a book also, because he's an evangelist. The difference between this type of reading and the previous one, let's say the artists of the Netherlands had to invent the kind of attribute that will tell you this is a merchant, this is an astronomer, this is a courtier, or whatever. The strong aspect, of course, it was traditional, and there was no problem to read this image because you have a long tradition behind them. Okay, so with this, let's go back to our Canadian example. And I want to go back to César Côté again. You remember I showed you last time these two, this pastel on the right and this sculpture in bronze of the whole pioneer. And last time I've tried to interpret this picture or this bronze in terms of the idea of representing a French-Canadian race, an idea that comes from Chanoine Groux and that César Côté could have been interested in. Of course, this type of approach doesn't, I would say, is not complete. It has to be completed by other aspects, and especially by the fact that these are representation of habitants, and then suggesting also their occupation. And I wanted to show you a few other examples, because César Côté made many of them, in which another aspect also is quite striking. Let's see here, the Père Cholette, is the same idea. Le Père Cyr, le Père, they are not religious people. Le Père is just a way to say the whole guy, the father, and nothing to do with religion there. Le Père Cholette, that means the whole guy who's called Cholette somewhere in the... And it was when César Côté went in Ontario in a place called Curran, he saw this man, and he made, like for Esdras Cyr, also a view in profile and a view, a frontal view, that you have both of them. What is also interesting here, it is the idea of representing old people. And in old age, I can begin to speak of that a little bit now more intimately. in old age, you have this kind of tangle, let's say, between wanting to be free, wanting to express freedom, but also a tendency to become a thing in a way. And I guess this is our fate, finally. We will all turn things. We could speak of reification. I don't know if it exists in English. It's a beautiful word in French. La reification. It comes from res in Latin, who means thing, to be transformed slowly in a thing. And the way to resist this idea, as seen by Susan Cote, it is to try to show in these faces of people who are aging, who are also worried about death, about what is happening, especially if the two images here are very different. If you see the one in front, he looks a little bit younger than the other one, I would say, but much more anxious. The profile view seems to express somebody very determined, who have a long life behind him, but who's still sure of himself. This is, I would say, in one hand, la liberté, and the other one, la chose. He covered the two aspects. And the one to resist to this reification, if you want, of this transformation into a thing, it's to incarnate an idea. And because since Plato, we know that the ideas have a certain relationship with soul. Plato says that. He says, if I want to define what is the soul, it's closer to the idea, to ideas, than anything else, because it's invisible, it's more profound, it's behind what we see, behind the appearances. And of course, here, the idea have nothing to do with Plato, but have to do with the idea I was mentioning last time a little bit of Abbé Groux on the incarnation of this specific race of people fighting against the climate and being rooted here in this land and having transformed it and make it a place to live in. This is more or less what he wants to suggest. In these old people, the way to resist to this, just to be a thing, a corpse, if you want, something that you can discard, it is that they incarnate an idea. They incarnate an ideal, I could say also. When we have so this is another key of this type of picture. Maybe you want to express a certain race, but you want also to deal with old age, because all of them are habitually very old and they are also, poor guy here is now in the domestic area. He's no more out in the land, he's with women. And maybe it explains a little bit his dubious look. It's hard to understand, but you will see another example of that also with the Père Taillon, with Jean-Baptiste Taillon. Then here, Susan Cote, I'm not even there to making in profile. He seems so fragile and so further in the process of aging that he put it in three-quarter view or in front view like this, with the same type of worriness. Mind you, these old guys have good reason to be worried because indeed their type of life was changing in front of their very eyes. The type of relation they used to have to the land and what was coming slowly during that time of this more industrialization of the rural life, they saw that their type of the dealing with the land was finished. So they could be worried with that. And some journalists at the time says that if painters have not keep the face of these people, we will have forgotten completely where were the first pioneers of Canada. And so this could explain maybe also their worry. There is also some portrait of women, and this is interesting because you could ask yourself, is it the same relationship with this ideal, let's say, that we will find in Portrait of Woman? Here is Portrait of Madame Gautier. She seems obvious of the painter. She's probably busy reading something, maybe her prayer book or whatever. But you will see in the Portrait of Woman, we have the impression that if they have that, especially the charcoal like this, when he doesn't elaborate too much the image, Susan Cote suggests maybe something else than what he suggests in men. As if their life risked more to lose their meaning than the man. Why? Because their life was very often defined only through their relationship to their men. And they are la mère Gauthier, but she wears the name of Monsieur Gauthier. You understand this type of denivelation, especially in peasant culture, where you have women who are, after all, the one who create this new race, are put in second level, if you want. They are defined by the relationship with their husband. And because of that, of course, maybe when the whole man doesn't work anymore, where he go back in this universe of a domestic universe, you could say, well, her lost also more meaning than him. And you will see that this, I think it's a very good example also of that, this opposition between la mère Moreau and le père Moreau. But he's okay. He's like the other one, in profile, sure of himself and all that. But he, in the face of the woman on the left side here, really, you have a kind of deep psychological type of study done by César Coté, in which he tried to find the complexity of this situation. She looks doubtful of what is happening. She's not sure that she should be portrayed like her husband. He have no problem with that. He's happy. He will be paid a tobacco pouch, and it will be, everything will be okay. But she's not sure of that. And then you will see how César Coté have transformed her. This is the same woman, almost as a kind now, a more ideological character. He reduced this ambiguity that we have in the charcoal and affirm her more like, I would say, Mémère Bouchard. For the French-Canadian here, you will know what I mean. It's this kind of endless series on TV. It was called Le Temps d'une Paix, in which you have this strong woman who are dealing with all the problem of the family and of the land. And indeed, then she could be seen as an equivalent of the man, and reduced also to a kind of an idea of an ideology. The background of this, and let's say the question that was asked about this occupation of these people and how it was seen, and I want to put it in a kind of broader context by showing you a few other pictures will be more, I would say, popular and less artistic. In fact, it's a good friend of mine, David Carroll, have published recently, and I find a very interesting book on very minor artists. And this is always difficult to do. When you deal with a minor artist, for an art historian, it's interesting, but it's a lot of work, because you try to find, you don't have the documents and all that. The minor artist on which he worked was called Edmond Massicotte. You have his name there, Edmond Massicotte. He was an illustrator. He never pretended to be a painter. He exhibited once in his lifetime at the Bibliothèque Saint-Sulpice, you know, on Saint-Denis Street, and in 1916, and that was it. He never exhibited. And he was also making his life by drawing publicity drawings or print like you see here. But what he suggests, and you will see this is the context, I would say almost the political context that we will see to situate this image of César Coté in their right frame, let's say. First of all, you will have very often at the time an opposition between life in city and life in the country. And of course, always by saying life in the country is much better, much more meaningful than what happened in the city. And here, there's a kind of opposition between the girls who works in factories and the other one with a big smile, if you see with his, the preparatory drawing, that live en plein air. This one, she's not really a peasant woman, but she have leisure and she can go to breathe the fresh air. It's a publicity for a very ridiculous thing. It was called the pilule rouge, the red pills for pale women. And so I don't know what was in this stuff, probably just nothing, just a placebo of anything, but it was sold at the time, and it was immensely popular, and Massicotte did an obvious, let's say, drawing for this type of publicity, in which he opposed the poor girls who come out from the factory, working in bad condition of air and pollution and everything. And here, the other one who is en plein air, is okay. And this opposition between, let's say, country and city is ideological, of course. And you could say that by making peasant the symbol of the French Canadian, César Côté make a choice there. So I ask myself, why we don't represent French Canadian by a businessman? Why not by a priest even, or something like that? Why to have choose a peasant as the typical French Canadian? And one of the reasons it is this ideology that you have during the 20s, during even the 10 and the 20s and the beginning of the 30s, in which you have this opposition between city and country, and with an immense valorization of the country. It is paradoxical because it's the time when Quebec become more and more urbanized. That means a lot of peasants quit their country to come in the city. And of course, the elite of the time are worried with that, because by all these people coming to the city, they say they will lose their tradition, they will lose their roots, we will not have anymore all these values that we like so much, which is stability, religion, language, and all that. All this will be mixed up in the city and will be lost. And it's in such a way that you have a current of thinking who's called by one of the famous not art historian, but historian of Quebec, who's called Michel Brunet, B-R-U-N-E-T. He called it the agriculturisme, agriculturism, if you want, or ruralism. This idea that the past is the real thing, that it's important, the present should be always suspicious, and the future is doomed, it will be terrible. And this type of approach, were defended by the elite, is in fact in complete contradiction to what's happening. I guess the peasants were not so happy in the country since they come in town. But nevertheless, they were told, this is terrible, we should not do that, stay where you are, stay poor as you are, and don't develop and all that. And Gru, for instance, would say the catastrophe of modern Quebec was the exodus from the country. The fact that all these peasants came in the city, he find it like a catastrophe. We lose our basis, he says, we lose our attachment to the land because of that. And he called the workers like a bunch of revolutionaires and sickly people creating children just for the cemetery. He's very, very strong on this type of opposition between both. But then you see a little bit the context of that. Look, another image of Massicotte was almost too clear, in which you see this good man sitting on his, how do you call it, la charrue? No, the plow, yeah, and some hay. And behind him, and of course with an angel above him, because he's protected, he's okay, he's in the perfect surrounding. And behind him, what you see, it's the fumes of the chimneys, of the train, and the ugly architecture of industrial agriculture of the city. So l'Almanach Roland have no doubt on what is good and what is bad. The opposition is very, very strong. And one of the most curious aspect of this type of ideology that I could try to find an illustration in Massicotte, it is a series of publicity he made for a company of awning. A company was also doing tents, let's see, for people to go in the country and to camp, and to camping, I would say. And it was called la Compagnie des Marchands. And the funny thing it is that he created this personage here that he called Le Père La Débauche. Débauche in English is the same word, the debauchery, I guess, dissolute living, Le Père La Débauche, with his toque and without missing a lot of teeth, and with his pipe. So the typical old habitant Canadien, who is now making the publicity for these awnings, And even if you read the caption, this is deep joie, this is really the joie of his worst, because it's full of bon yen de bon yen. Bon yen is a deformation of bon Dieu, because you don't want to curse, because the vicar will fall on you. And so you transform all these curse in, Calis will become Calixte. You will try to tabernacle will become tabernouche. So we were very good at this, to curse, but also not to be going to the confession right away after. And so he says, Boyen, and then he, look, I will just read you the caption in French, but because it's, alors, voulez-vous un bon conseil? Say, do you want a good advice? Go to buy your awning at Marchand or whatever. But what he used after, pour vos blinds. Pour vos blinds, this is, of course, coming, it's the English word. For, in French, you will say les stores, ou les auvents, or des choses comme ça. You will not say blinds. But this is typical of the joie of the time, you know, in which you have a lot of these English words who are seeping in the language like this. And Massicotte on this doesn't make any concession. He really reflected completely. In the other one, he even opposed the language of a fancy guy from the city who asked this old man, pardon, monsieur, mais veuillez me dire où vous avez acheté cette jolie petite tente. And of course, this is completely, it's not even normal French. It is too elaborated for that. And the other answer, of course, with joie, c'est une sucrée. Hein? Stan sucré. Stan, c'est une. It is a sucré, a sweet one, I guess, or something like that. Stan sucré, hein? Un, also, le un. This is very important in French-Canadian language. Un. When you don't know too much what to say, un. It fills a gap. It's wonderful. And, ben, c'est à la compagnie des auvents de Marchand, puis là, il donne l'adresse. He gives the address at the end, so if you want to go. But what is curious here it is that he used this old guy to sell and to inside of the society of consummation. And as if he was selling exactly the opposite of what he is. What he's selling is new and he's old. What he's selling is fast and he's slow. And what he's selling, and why this personage was so efficient in this publicity, it is because he could claim that these awnings were as good as like in the good old days, as if they were done by craftsmen, as if, and he knows what is good stuff and not, because he belonged to another generation, and he can really tell you, I will give you a good advice, go to this company and all that. And again, it is paradoxical because it's almost the reverse of the rural exodus. Instead of peasants coming to the city, what they try to do here is to send the city dwellers to the country. Go in the plein air, go to have a little tent and camp there. Où avez-vous trouvé cette jolie petite tente? That's exactly what they want to sell. And so it's paradoxical, but again, you have these two aspects of this ideology, the devalorization of the city life and a kind of hyper-valorization of the country life. Léon Guérin, who was a kind of one of our first sociologists, I would say, have said that there was two types of this attachment to the terroir, it's hard to translate. The terroir, in terroir you have the word terre, land. So an attachment to the land, or to the soil even, I could say. You had one direction was a little bit like that, where you make fun of it, where you have, you present personage with, I would say, with a tongue in the cheek, and you are not complete. But others, there's another part of this literature and these illustrations were very serious, in the contrary, where they want you to feel that these values of the past are the most important one. And it's a pity that they are disappearing little by little. And funnily, Massicotte, who did this aspect, who had fun probably to do all this picture, did also the reverse of that. And he have made a series of lithographs in which all these old usage suddenly are taken very seriously, and also, I would say, create the real context in which the the Suzor-Côté image that we saw in the beginning should be situated, because Suzor also certainly don't mock at his habitants. He doesn't laugh at them. In the contrary, he wants to present them as the real pioneer. But let's say the culture was suggested behind this will be illustrated like this by Massicotte. And you have to imagine these are photos who have been, after the effect, painted with aquarelle, with watercolor, so just to put the color on the photo. And they were published in album, but they were sold also by the piece. They were transposed also in little drawings in the famous Almanach du Peuple, published by Beauchemin. Any people above 70 French Canadian must have a copy of the Almanach in his library. It was a kind of book in which they were predicting the temperature not only of tomorrow but of the whole year. So it was wonderful. You had the whole year. You would say it will rain at this day, it will not rain, and so you knew everything. And also a lot of texts about the whole tradition and all that. Obviously, these type of books were aimed at the country people. This is the elite from the city trying to sell the very idea of keep your tradition, keep your identity. So for instance, here, the benediction of the first year, I remember my grandfather was doing that, and we were all very shaky and impressed by that. We were going on our knees like this, and he was blessing us, not like a priest, not making a little cross, but by extending his hands, exactly like this. And then Massicotte multiplied around them a lot of signs, I would say, of the past, like the kind of stove that you have there with two levels, like the poêle à deux ponts. You have also on the right, what we call a bandé. So this is a place where you put the kind of, let's say, container for the water, because the water you get from outside the house with the pump like this. So you bring that, and you have a bench where you put the water, and nobody could sit there. So that's little details like that. And of course, on the wall, always the cross, the black cross of Tempérance, là. And sometimes, I don't remember. Yeah, and the type of furniture, even, how do you see Catalogne, this type of carpet that you have on the floor, was very typical also of this type of sort of thing. So then you see that Massicotte not only now take it seriously, but also have almost the approach of an ethnographer, as if he wanted to keep the memory of some old customs and attaching an enormous importance to them, as if to lose that, it's to lose complete your identity. I'll show you a few others. This is, well, another benediction, but here, the one who bless is the vicar of the parish. If you see, he have his cassock that you see at the bottom of the, here somewhere. And he is making, of course, the sign of the cross on all these people, but the guy behind him with a hat or whatever it is there to make a collection. Why not? Religion goes well with business, and so you have, it's called la collecte du petit enfant Jésus. Alors, if it's the petit enfant Jésus who wants money, who could resist? You know, it's so cute and all that. So the people there are, and the funny thing also it is that the iconography on the walls are different here. Says here there's a poster which says "Aimez vos parents." Sometimes it's difficult, but okay, "Aimez vos parents." And here it's probably or an ancestor or somebody in the family, or maybe a politician also. I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what is this guy here. And there's a little calendar also on the wall. La prière en famille, of course, the family in prayer. So it's before the Cardinal Léger, who was doing it through the radio, but then they have their image of the Sacred Heart on the wall, and it's done in the night, and that's why you open a little bit before going to sleep, and you have again all the detail of the Catalogne, and also the chair, typical of the peasant chair, and and all these people praying in the night. And here's the, I don't know if you know this usage, but I remember also in my childhood we were doing that. At the Epiphany, that's means of 12th day after Christmas, we had a big, French Canadian likes to have big meals and things like that. But we have a big meal where all the aunt and the uncles and all that, all the friends of family came. And the mother will arrive with a big cake in which you have hidden somewhere a pea and a bean. The one who gets the bean in his piece of cake become the king. And the woman who gets the pea become the queen. And then everybody laugh. You have to sit together, to kiss together. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody to make a big fuss about that. They get a little crown in paper on their head, and it's part of the fun of this evening. I thought to myself, okay, maybe there's a contradiction here, because you have always la croix de la tempérance. So when you have this cross, habitually there's no alcohol in the house. That's what it means. So why they call it that way? You know that there was in the 1840, there was a lot of predication in Quebec against booze. It never worked, of course, but anyway, there was a lot of these predications. For instance, Shiniki and all these people, the priests, were going from one country to the other, one village to the other, trying to convince people not to drink alcohol anymore. And the way to engage them, if you want to commit them, was to say, okay, you will now be part of a group. It's called the Lacordaire. Lacordaire is a priest in France, but let's say they call this group of people that way. It reminds me of a joke. It's two French Canadians who goes in Paris, and the garçon in the café says, Madame, voulez-vous, Monsieur, voulez-vous un verre de vin? Do you want a glass of wine? Le gars dit, non, je suis Lacordaire. Et vous, Madame? Non, je suis Jeanne d'Arc. Ah oui, because the woman had also, their association was called Jeanne d'Arc. So the garçon said, alors moi, je suis Napoléon. He thought they were crazy. Yeah. No, it's exactly that. It's a sign. But if you notice in this picture, you have here a man who is serving, what is he? Doesn't work much. Oh, wait. There was a man here who seems to serve from a bottle of beer to his neighbor. So beer will be impossible, except there was spruce beer at the time. And that's probably what he used there. Spruce beer is okay. It's terrible in taste, but it's no alcoholic. And so all these little details, like the opposition between the chair and the old lady with the rocking chair, all this is always well observed. That's why I speak of almost an ethnographic compulsion here in the part of Massicotte. And another image, this is the corn-husking party, les pluchettes de Blénin in French, in which they were removing all the leaves and the husk, if you want, of the corn. And when one guy had the luck to find a red one, see, you know that some corn are, most of them are yellow and whitish, but sometimes you could have a red one. He was allowed to kiss his neighbor. But you see that she doesn't like the idea too much. She's very prude, and she makes a gesture like that. So if you think of it, this gives an image of a society very sweet and quiet, with feasts and people, and a lot of religion also. Everything is controlled by religion. And I was asking myself, which kind of nationalism they are preaching behind that? Which kind of identity they try to give to French Canadian by this type of image, and by son côté also stressing the peasant culture so much. And I thought maybe I could find some ancestor to that. And one possible influence of this type of ideology is, of course, Maurice Barrès, who is a French author that will define also the attachment to the French soil, if you want, by saying what is the nation. What I can define as a nation is somebody who's attached not only to a land, but to a cemetery, meaning that the link between the land and the dead are what root the nation. This is, of course, you have two conceptions of the nation. It was important to distinguish here to understand what is the ideology behind this. One, it is, I would say, very much influenced by German Romanticism, and in particular by a philosopher called Herder, H-E-R-D-E-R. Herder created this idea of the Wohlgeist. In German, Volk is like people, and Geist is the spirit, the spirit of the people. You define then the belonging to a nation not only because you like it or you want to be with the people, but being born in a certain territory. And also by having as your language, your maternal language. And also to be linked by certain history of the past that you share with your ancestors, by a religion, by a language, and also by a certain of usage, like the one we just saw in Massicotte. This conception of the nation is, to my mind, very ambiguous because it's exclusive. And it goes well with pluriculturalism. This is important to understand. We are defined that way. You have all the rights to be different from us, but you are not us. You understand this type of, that pluriculturalism could go with a Wohlgeist, with this idea of defining yourself by something that is bigger than you, the language you didn't invent, the religion either, the land where you are born and all this. This is always before you. And opposed to that, of course, was the Rousseau concept, let's say, of the Aufklärung, of the Enlightenment concept of nation, in which nation is based on a personal decision of people wanting to live together because they want to share the same value, the same obligation, and the same rights. But coming from an individual who can choose that and could choose also to quit it. To say enough of this kittenerie or whatever that he doesn't like here, and I want to go to Ontario where I will be with people where I live happy together. Well, but this conception of nation is very different from the Wohlgeist. It's really, it's the idea of Rousseau of a contrat social. It's a contract that an adult can take to share certain value, obligation, rights, and in which he's free to adhere to it or to detach himself from it. And this, of course, when you think of it, what was suggested by Suzor-Coté and by Massicotte, it is a Wohlgeist idea. And it's exclusive, it's divisive, and it's anyway, this is, you understand that's politically very actual always, these type of discussion. So I was asking myself, maybe I could find even an ancestor of that, and Krieghoff came to my mind because Krieghoff is born in Holland, but was raised mostly in Germany. So this idea of a Wohlgeist for a man like Krieghoff was something that was genuine, that could work well. And indeed, he tried to do, like much before, in fact, Suzor-Coté, he tried to do also a personification of the French-Canadian peasant almost by a caricature. These are very commercial type of works that he did. He did many, many of them, selling them to his clients, most of them were Anglophone. They were happy to bring that in England and to see, look how the French-Canadian there looks. They have always this little pipe, and these are the pioneer of the place. And you will see some art historians find these pictures derogatory. They says he mocks at us. He's not with us. But in fact, I'm not sure of that. I think it's more complex than that. What you want to see is a stranger in Quebec. You see it from the outside. But you see it exactly like I was telling you, like a pluriculturalist approach. So, okay, I have my own Geist, if you want. I have my Wohlgeist as a German, as a Dutch. But they have also their own. And I can have empathy with them. I can understand that. And I could represent them as objectively as I can. And you will see, okay, I have a few examples of that. Well, sometimes with a pipe upside down. Sometimes the tuque is always there, the tuque, of course. And and change color. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's blue. But like you could expect from any commercial type of work in which you have not much variation, very close to a type there, not to specific individual. I have the impression that you have one whole guy who pose for him and he repeats it all the time. This one is a little bit different because he has his instrument and he looks very dangerous, but most of them are repetitive in that. And then I asked myself, where Krieghoff will be closer to Massicotte? It's not in this portrait. Maybe there you could see a relationship with César Côté, what was the first portrait I was showing. But with Massicotte, you have these type of representation that Krieghoff did and are quite interesting. It's called breaking the land, or a Friday surprise. So what happened, of course, these guys were, let's say on Friday, you were supposed to eat fish and no meat. And what they eat there, it's porc frais, that is terrible. It's a pork côtelette. And suddenly, the vicar come and surprise them, you see, in the middle of breaking the land or breaking the Friday things. And each one have a different reaction. You could see here, there's a very happy dog, because the guy just gave him his côtelette rapidly. You see the whole guy here with the toque, the whole mother also is making like this, you see, very shocked. And of course, the cook tried to hide herself there. And each one react differently in the situation. The mother here cover his côtelette with another plate, which is clever to do anyway. But then you say, okay, there is a difference with Massicotte here. Massicotte is all praising this religious aspect of the life. Here, there's a critic of it. And what Krieghoff tried to suggest, it is that he knows better the Volkites of the French Canadian than what the elite, and especially the clerical elite, try to impose on them. This is the real way to be a French Canadian, to have fun and to not to bother too much with religion. But always we have these people coming and breaking our fun and all that, as if, as an empathic observer, he could see more the root. And it's not for nothing that Marius Barbeau, who is our great folklorist, let's see, have written a very enthusiastic book about Krieghoff. Because that was the thesis of Barbeau also, that you find indeed under this varnish of religious culture and all that imposed by the elite, the real peasant, the real, I would say, Volk of French Canadian at the time. There's another aspect here. The priest is older, and Harper have suggested that in one picture, the previous one, Shiniki was represented. He was one of the apostles of the temperance that I mentioned before, and he was living at Curé Blanchard place, and Curé Blanchard is probably represented it as an older man, and here's the same type of things that are happening. They are eating their pork chop, and suddenly this guy came, and they tried to hide themselves. The one who's always, he bend like this because he thinks he will get a spank from the back. And of course, with Krieghoff, all these representation of the auberge, of the inn. This was denounced by the priests of the time as the devil den. Some people say, some priests, I have a quotation, but I will just give them from memory. It says, a man should not marry a woman who dances. Because she's close to evil, things like that. And if you want to save the morality of your village, avoid divertissement. Cut these in and all that. But of course, they were very popular. And not only they didn't disappear, but they augment with time. More and more you went. And this was one of the famous ones, Joli Fou. It was called the Joli Fou Inn, in which you represent all the possible stage of ebriété. You see the of ivrognerie dangereuse. You have this, the violoneux, the guy who played the violin, who go with a bottle in his hand, or even with you will see with a lamp in his hand in the middle of the day. Well, it's early morning, let's be fair. And there's an interesting opposition I just want to, you see the carriage here with slender type of sleigh and all that. This is the bourgeois voiture, the bourgeois car, if you want, drawn by a horse and all that, and with a little couple inside, and everything seems okay. Just nearby, there's a couple who throw snowballs to each other, which is not nice. There's a depressed one. He said, "We'll drink too much." There's another who started, "Hey, let's have fun," and all that. And if you go a little bit further, it's another detail of the sick picture. You see the typical berline. This is the carriage of the French Canadian opposed to the other one. And of course, they are reversed, and they fall, and they have problems. And on the top, you have the sign of Joli Fou with 2 barrels of rums on each side of the horse, meaning this is the cause and this is the effect, huh? Of course, what's happening here. But later, the Krieghoff make a repetition of the same theme, in which, if you look here, the French Canadians are all right, and so they have a nice conversation before going, but here they have in big trouble because the horse is going without any people in the carriage. Huh? So he reversed now the critique, if you want. It's more the bourgeois who is not displaced, and the habitant is okay. And this is always, you will find in Krieghoff picture, this kind of criticism of the law, of the interdit, of what you should not do. And as if he was, like I told you, trying to find more deep type of peasant culture. And that's why Marius Barbeau admired him, because Barbeau was a folklorist, one of the first ethnologists that we had, and was going in Charlevoix and all the country to really to reconstruct all these usage and okay. Well, maybe I have so many examples of that, but I will give you few sculpture of this sculptor who's called La Liberté. La Liberté noticed that in the representation of the old days, one main aspect of the life of the peasant was omitted. It was work. And it's true, if you look at Massicotte pictures, and even of César Côté, all these people don't do anything. They are just sitting in their room, or they are feasting, and work is like completely forgotten. And here, La Liberté wanted to make his contribution also to this theme, let's say, because after all, he says, I was born in the country, I work with my parents on the farm, I know all this aspect, and he made, for instance, a series of head of people, like you see a row of them here in his studio on Rue Sainte-Famille. He bought the studio, and with many levels in which he could rent other studio to other artists, and it was for a while full of the sculpture of La Liberté like this. And you see these heads were all with a caption under, in which he says, for instance, l'agriculteur, say the farmer here, it will be for him a typical farmer, but they are very individualized. It's not any farmer, it's one specific guy. But by trying to give a meaning just to a face like that, he had a problem, because why not to call it le forgeron, say, or the blacksmith or something? So he solved the problem by writing on it what it is. So that's interesting, because you remember in the beginning I says the key to this representing occupation, it was to associate the personage with attribute, with something around an object that will tell you what he's doing. Here, by keeping just the head like this, he had a problem, so he solved it by a caption, in a way. But he did also a series of representation of all the, I would say, all the gesture of the rural life that he knew. And you have, again, in his studio, on shelves like this little statuette that were put in bronze later and bought by the Musée du Québec. And they are all there. I think there's something like 230 of them. So I will show you a few of them. You see like, and it's always the relationship between, let's say, an habitant and his tools and in action. Something. So that's why it says what La Liberté succeeded to do, it is to fill that gap that was not touched by the other and have this idea of representing work. And again, with the same type of ethnographic compulsion, to be exact, to show exactly all the gesture as they are, if you saw wood or if you prepare your site. the hay binder. And you have, don't think these are huge sculptures. Actually, they are about that size. They're small, but there's many of them. And they have this, so women are also represented, the rake, the cite. Each one have a specific gesture analyzed by them. Some critics also were not so enthusiastic about all that. They says enough of this terroir thing, you know, where they say we live in the city now, it's over. But I think they misunderstood the ethnographic dimension of what La Liberté want to do. And it's interesting to see that there is, historically, ethnography as a science is born also with the same conception of the nation that I was mentioning before. It is because if you define the nation as a Volksgeist, you are interested in oral literature, you are interested in the usage of people, you are interested in folklore. So ethnology has its roots as a science in this kind of what Auguste Comte used to call l'école rétrograde, the school who go back in the past like this. This is the kind of collusion between a modern social science and whole ideas of tradition and things like that. And after all, you know, the idea of tradition is very central to ethnography. You cannot have ethnic description of people without knowing their usage, their myth, their religion, and their language and everything. So there is a kind of collusion there. And in that sense, you could say that La Liberté is modern. In that sense, that is closer to ethnography. But, and this is the quilt duty. Women are trying to make a quilt. I go now to, and I finish with that, with Holgate, because I thought it would be a good test of my theory. And you would say, I would suggest that with Holgate, we are changing the mood a little bit. He have made, and for me at the beginning, it was impossible to understand why he did that. He had made a series of illustrations for a book that was called, in French, Vieilles choses et vieilles gens. It was published by a very unknown author who's called Bouchard, and this Bouchard was a deputy of Kamouraska, so he was a political man, I would say, but he lived on the farm and he decided, he knew how it was and all that, and decided to make a little booklet about that, in which you have description of different happening in the country. Like, for instance, this crier. This is a man who used to go on a little pedestal, like you see here, after the Mass, and will announce, let's say, that Joe have a bull to sell, and another one want to have his kitchen wares to sell, and things like that. He will make announcement for the village to be interested. And he was also selling indulgence for purgatory, for the poor people who are in the purgatory. This of course, it was wonderful. This go right away to the church. But you notice that Holgate doesn't represent the church here. The only allusion, I think, it is these three pieces of wood on the little hill that could look like a Calvary, but I think he does it with a tongue in the cheek. But anyway, so he have this, I would say, very typical personage of the old days. When, of course, when there was no telephone, when there's no, not much road also between the villages. So he was useful for that. He was, I'm sure, a jolly fellow, announcing what's happening in the village and also selling for the vicar these des armes du purgatoire. So that was another speciality of this man. And the feeling I get here, it is that Holgate is outside of that. He's an onlooker. And in fact, if you look in the bottom of the picture here, you have an old guy who smiles, and you could see, is he a participant or is he an onlooker? Is he somebody who's outside and look at this with fun? And I think this is the key. You could have suddenly Holgate, who's a kind of modern artist, being interested ethnographically to this usage, and not putting in too much in question. Well, he doesn't go as far as Massicotte and all those people to show the church and in a positive way. But he can have a kind of detached, I would say, approach to it, and also treat it. And then suddenly you see this strange mixture of the text of Bouchard, who is very very depressed, very nostalgic, I would say. Oh, all those great usage of the past are disappearing, and it's so bad, and all that. And suddenly these modern type of illustration, in fact, seems to accompany the text, but are in completely different intention. Danto, a modern philosopher, an aesthetician, let's say, says we have always to ask what is external to the picture when you see it. And I would say what is external to the picture here, it is this very idea of Vulgates, of all this idea that you define people only by his users and all that. Here, the fact that he's detached himself and he see it from outside, he reaffirms in a certain way the freedom of the individual. And what I suggest, of course, it is that Holgate will represent the other conception of the nation as a contrat, as a something, in which you could accept to live near these people and to have fun with them. And Holgate was perfectly bilingual, for instance, he knew French perfectly, and he was adored by his students, both French and English. And so you could choose this type of value, but you choose them. They are not imposed to you from your birth and from your tradition and ancestry. You have this relationship to the nation who is free, and also will stress the importance of the individual. You will see. Another example of this engraving is the blacksmith. I don't know why it was not treated by Massicotte or the other, or even by La Liberté. He forgot this specific occupation. The chiaro obscuro here is interesting because, of course, the blacksmith is always associated with hell a little bit, with the Vulcan, the god of the hell in the Greek mythology, was associated to the blacksmith also. And then you have this series of pictures of Holgate, which I think are the more interesting one, in which he will apparently treat also some people of the land, if you want. I like this one with the lumberjack. Of course, now the relation is not with the soil, but the relation is with the forest, and you could say, well, it's an equivalent of this. The first thing, you have a very determined individual here, and instead of characterizing him only by his tool, I think one of the originality here, it is that Holgate tried to characterize by a landscape behind him. But landscape behind him is not a territory, it's a backdrop. It plays exactly the same role than the attribute that we have in the beginning. A lumberjack should be associated with the lumbers behind him on a river and with a landscape of, I would say, of the springtime, if you want. And okay, he has his instrument. What he has in his hand is a kind of hook, or I think you can say gaff also in English. It's in French, it's the same word. And so he has his instrument, but he's he determined also as an individual, somebody that you could recognize. See, who's not a type. And he made some variation of this personage in engravings. Like here, you see him in action. You see it's the same one, the same hat and all that. Here you see him associated with the tool. The landscape now almost disappeared. Maybe there's a little hill on the right, but then the tool replaced the landscape. I think it's a kind of a counterproof that I just said before. And that means also that landscape here is just a backdrop, just a way to characterize your personage. He have also here, the same personage is used with different type of tools and change, of course, occupation. Sometimes he's a lumberjack, sometimes he's a woodcutter, and now he's a peasant with a rake and with landscape and animals. Another example of that, the fire ranger. Okay, in certain case, we know the name of the sitter there. This is what a guy, I think, if I remember well, was called Monsieur Fréchette or something like that. Anyway, he was a fire ranger in the north and near Mont-Tremblant. And he knew Holgate like this, and he speaks of him as a very strong fellow, being able to walk in the forest and all that. And maybe the forest fire are represented here just by his pipe, the danger of it. But, and then I says, okay, here again, he goes to depict somebody linked with the forest, like the lumberjack that we just saw before. So Easy is trying to compete with the César Côté and all that, with the farmer team, you know, by suggesting something else. But then there's another key, is the landscape, again, that is important. Not only the landscape is a backdrop, but it's also characterized in time. If you see the very strong lighting that you have here, suggests the summer. If you have, in the first one, a springtime activity, because these piece of wood, these lumbers on the river cannot move during the winter, and the draftman, in fact, more than the lumberjack, is very useful in the springtime to detach them and to let them go. And here you will have a summer picture. And then I got the confirmation of this because there's a winter picture here. But then you get out completely of the peasant and the link to the land. This is a skier, a man who likes ski. And he's not any man who likes ski. This is Jack Rabbit. This is one of the most famous skier we have in Canada. The guy was skiing at 106, still. And he made the Olympic when he was 75 years old, I think. And so he was really mad about this. And you see also even if I'm working for Concordia, I can say that, this little sign here is McGill. The red eagle of McGill, because he created a group of skiers that was doing the, and here in this case we have even a picture by his where the landscape is isolated, if you want, but it's exactly the same landscape that he pushed back behind him. So after spring and the summer, here's the winter picture, and of course you expect to have an autumn one, and here is the naturalist. Oh yeah, and I have to stress also each time we have different individual finally. They are not defined only by the attachment to a soil and all that, they are people with different occupation. They are characterized by their occupation, like this naturalist is in nature and with his binocular. And behind him, you see the landscape become to be the beginning of autumn. You see some color in the trees. And so you could say, well, he got carried over by this idea of making a typical personage for each season. And, but it's not cyclical because he didn't stop at that. Others' picture doesn't use at all this type of presentation. Like here, Paul the Trapper is inside, he's not outside, and he's certainly a French-Canadian if you see the crucifix on the wall. You will not have this easily in a Protestant home. And then, okay, I could stress the fact that with Holgate we are getting to another conception of nationalism. I've told you already, more closer to this contrat social in which each individual make a contribution to the society, but is also feel free before it is not defined only by his tradition, by where he was born, by his maternal language and all that. And so this attempt to reach, let's say, both the individual and his occupation, let's say, finally is more profound and make us think of more ideologically than the other presentation that we had before. See, when you try to define only the personage by his bone structure or by his race, you are in fact not really reaching the personage because after all we are free to do whatever we want with our bone structure. It doesn't define us so much. But now you get more inside of the personage. There's choices there. There's a way to see life. And because of that, you could see this permanent aspect of this portrait is interesting because it doesn't come in contradiction with the portrait of an individual. It's a better balance. So the next time I will try to make the same type of reasoning with the concept of class. And we will speak mostly of a worker class, but you will see it's again the same type of problem also that we will deal with. Okay, so thank you.